Hey everybody, this is Dark Guardsman and welcome back to another progress update on ICBM Classic for 112. So over the last couple days I haven't been posting progress videos and showing off things. I have got a decent amount of work done. So the rocket launcher is now completely functional. It has a nice render in the third person. Render looks decent in the first person. You can aim on aim state. On top of this, you can dual wield these, although it doesn't really give you much ability, but it looks kind of cool, so you can actually have one in each hand, and when you aim them, they will both aim at the same time and kind of give a nice fearsome look. Although at the moment, only one of them actually will work, and it will always be the right-click one. This is because of how it behaves like a bow, and I am actually working on doing a few different things to kind of work towards that ideal of it behaving like a bow, but for the moment, you can kind of pull off that cool little visual. So go ahead and flip that back out. On top of this, I have got all the Tier 1 and Tier 2 models converted to .object format and implemented to the game, so they all actually do render. Let me go ahead and pop these all out so you guys can see them. A lot of these did convert rather easily, so all the Tier 1s went really smoothly. For those who were following on Twitter, I kind of got this done in about a day or so. It wasn't too difficult, just had to import into Blender, fix the material, files, do a little bit of work to clean up the geometry, but overall they turned out really well and they look exactly like the original, although I do need to come through, or somebody else needs to come through eventually and clean the actual geometry up. The software that was originally used to make these, and of course I didn't make these models for those who ask, and I don't actually know who did. CalClavi never did really keep track of who worked on the project and did what. I have a feeling I do know the name of the person. Eventually we'll find it and actually label that he made all these assets. But when they were made with a piece of software called Techni, which was capable of producing just little cubes and stuff. And I can actually show this software off here if we flip back to the main view. So I was going to actually show off, as part of this little display, all the models and the progress and how you actually convert the models. I may do a separate video on the full process, but I can at least show what the models look like and kind of why we had to convert them. So part of the process, we have the old Techni models. So I can open this up with a piece of software called Techni. It's got a nice little opening display. The software is ancient. I mean, it's really old. They actually moved to a web-based version here that some people still use. But here's the software. You can pretty much make cubes. You can select shapes, move the shapes around. You get a little UV sheet up here where you can put all the textures and move the textures around and everything. But you're pretty limited. You can only set the dimensions, position, offset, set the texture position, and rotate it. You can't do anything more than that. So a lot of people, when they made these models, they would actually take a normal cube and they would shove them inside of each other. And this is something we need to fix, because with the Blender system, which creates .object models, we don't actually need to do this anymore. So let's pop up in Blender in that same exact model with a more modern software. Same model, same visual. Ignore the texture glitching. Blender doesn't like the small resolution. But with this, I mean, we still have the pieces in here, but we can get rid of these pieces because we can switch to edit mode and then switch to wireframe. And I could sit here and select these and actually move these up and down and move the geometry so we don't have this overlapping and the pieces fit much better together. At least that's the plan. Eventually we'll get around to actually doing that in the future, especially for the Tier 2 ones. The Tier 1 missiles don't really need it too much. They look perfectly fine. They're nice and clean, so we can delay that off for later. But the Tier 2 ones are the ones that actually do need a lot of help. These are the ones that did not convert very easily. I noted on Twitter multiple times that almost every single one of these had a problem. There was multiple issues, and you know, we'll definitely see this with a few of the ones down here. So a lot of the basic Tier 2 ones did convert without too much hassle. The main thing that had to be fixed on them is a lot of the fins were broken, and the lower fins had to be, I just got rid of them. So you notice on these ones how they have a lower set of fin on the Tier 1s. These ones had a lower set of fins as well, but they did not convert whatsoever, so they had to get rid of them. Although, to be honest, it looks actually pretty good. That nice boxy look of the fins down the bottom actually leads to a nice visual. But a lot of them do work now. The only one that needed major work was this one. A lot of the upper fin pieces just completely did not convert, and I'll show that off in a second. And the cluster missile still needs a lot of help. This is where I was talking about the overlapping pieces, and this is one of the reasons why I want to fix the geometries. This does actually create problems for the graphic rendering having overlapping pieces, as the depth system that actually tells like what piece should render in front of the other one on your screen. Because for those who don't know how 3D model graphics work, everything is two-dimensional when it's actually rendered. So when you're looking at your screen, you're giving a two-dimensional picture. This updates like 60 times a second to do a refresh rate and fool your mind into believing Not only is it three-dimensional, but that it's in motion. Part of making this work is there's a system called like a depth check that will figure out what piece is sitting in front of the other piece and render the most forward piece possible. So that way when I'm looking at this model, I don't see the one behind it, and it doesn't render. It's gone, it's off my screen. But when you have two overlapping pieces, the system gets confused and can't figure out what piece needs to render, so you get this flickering effect. And this is one of the reasons why we need to fix the geometry. And then also another reason is this model's texture sheet completely broke during the conversion process. Not sure exactly what happened. I tried to convert it a few different times. Every single time, same result. So there's something wrong fundamentally with the model itself. Good news is we can fix it. It's not something that would be incredibly hard. It just will take maybe a day of somebody sitting there toying with the model and cleaning it up. Additional good news is we literally could just copy the body of one of these missiles and put right in the middle here, and just copy the bottom tanks here in the top warhead piece, and we're done. Very likely that either me or Grogger is going to probably come through and do that. Same thing we're probably going to do with the tier 3 ones. So we haven't done the tier 3s, and we haven't done like any of the other ones beyond that. So we don't have the nuclear clusters done. We don't have any of the special ones. A homing actually is done. That one was actually a tier 1 missile apparently, so that one got converted. But we still have to do missile modular. Missile modular is actually supposed to look like a conventional one, so I'm probably going to do that one here in a bit. And then red matter, antimatter. Those ones should convert relatively easy because they're pretty simplistic models. Anyways, let's bounce. Actually, no. First, let me show that the missile renders work itself. The missile renders actually were pretty easy to do when it comes to the Entity versions, because I figured out a really cool trick that you can do in newer Minecraft versions that's not as easy as it was in the older Minecraft versions. Like the older ones, you just did a special item render, and you did all your item renders, and you had to handle that all yourself. With the new stuff, this is all done via JSON. Like all these renders for the items are actually done via JSON system, and there's like a little sheet for it. Let me actually flip back to the main screen here and show this off. These are actually the material files. So this is what the renders for the items actually looks like in the code wise. So we have some basic translations that handles the third person and first person, which also I forgot to show off. You can dual wield missiles. So these handle all the different hand positions. So third person left hand, right hand, GUI, so if it's sitting in your inventory, first person right hand, first person left hand. And there's different transformations where we say, okay, we want to move so much, we want to rotate so much, we want to scale so much, and ground. So this is all handled. And then you just go down here and tell it, okay, condensed, this is where the model for the condensed missile is. And you go through and you do this for all the different variants and everything else. And it's not too bad. This is actually really easy. Prior to this in 1.7, what we did is each one of the missile objects had to store its location for its model and texture. Then we had to go in and write render code. And let me go find the render code here real quick. So we would have to write actual render code. So this is the render code for the Entity missile. So we would have to write this for every single thing. So if we wanted to render on the ground, we would have render code that looked like this. And we would tell it, okay, I want to translate, I want to scale, I want to like do rotations. And we would have to do all that stuff for every different state. So if you had first person versus third person, we would have to do different render states for that. Of course, a lot of the code was recyclable, and there was things you could do like if statements and switch statements to cut down the work, but it was relatively the same. Now for the Entity, for actually doing the Entity, we still have to do this code, but the cool thing is when we call render missile here, it comes down to here, and what it does is it creates an Entity item. So like the same item you would see if I say, for example, dropped a remote detonator on the ground. This same exact code that renders this, we can just come down here and go, okay, I have this Entity item, I want to set its world position, I want to set its position, I want to set the item, which we set to a classic missile with the explosive ID, and we just tell Minecraft, hey, I want to render it, and we're done. And it's that smooth and clean. A lot of the stuff actually does do this now, like the block does all this. This is the reason why the blocks now can render any block in the game. Explosive does something similar. It pretty much just goes, hey, I want to render the explosive block as an Entity, and it's really clean, smooth code now. That's made a huge difference with 1.12. So there's people that are like, but 1.7 was so much easier to render. 1.12 actually has its own perks. So let me go ahead and set the time today. Set time, set day. I forgot the command there for a second. Let's flip back to the main screen here before we go back. So one thing I forgot to show off is that you can actually dual wield missiles now. So you can have, for example, you can have a rocket launcher in one hand, your missile in the other hand. So it will feed off that missile in your hand as well. So if you want to make sure that you know exactly what missile you're going to fire, it will check that hand position first before anything else. That's not even something I even programmed. That just kind of happened. You can also wield missiles in both hands, and this works in both first person and third person. And it looks pretty good, actually. So that's a lot of code that now got implemented with the newer versions. Anyways, let's flip back to the main screen and show off some of the issues that kind of happen with the models and why it's actually going to take a little bit of time. So tier 1s, there wasn't any issues. So like tier 1s, we just ran a converter, we got some models, and we had to just add some textures and stuff to them, and I already showed off like the Techni models and what they look like. So it was the tier 2 models that were the ones that had the issue. So we used this piece of software. It's called Techni to Object. I forget the author who made it. It's a really simple software. You drop it in the folder, you run it, and when you run it, it will pretty much take any Techni model it finds and turn it into an object model. The problem with this is it does not do your textures for you, and it does not do your materials. So when you try to go to render it in Minecraft, you'll get a blank white texture. And you guys saw this with earlier videos with the rocket launcher. It was all white blank, it didn't have a material on it. So that's where we had to come through and open up a lot of this stuff in Blender and actually get it moved and around. So let's go into here. So with the Techni model, so let's open up, say for example, and I accidentally threw all the stuff in here. Let me actually clean this folder up really quick. Actually, did we? Yeah, we did actually do that. So clean this up really fast. There we go. So with this, the one that ended up breaking the most was a thermal bug. So I opened this one up, the Techni model, and just to show you guys, it looks perfectly fine. All the geometry's here, the lower fins are here, the top pieces are here, everything is in exactly what position it needs to be in. But then when we converted it, and this is where the object stage 1 stuff is at, this is all the converted stuff, and let me close Chrome there. It messed up everything. So we're opening this up actually in Windows Viewer, but it wouldn't matter if we open up Blender or not, it would have the same result. So the lower fins completely failed rotation, and they're not, the weird thing about these, they're not rotated. That is just how the geometry is. For those who don't know how 3D parts work, you set up little points, and the points create lines, and lines create faces. So if you put the geometry point here and then put another point over there, it now will create a face and lines and set up in that direction. And it's not rotated, because what you can do is you can create a face and then rotate it and apply rotation to it to end up with a different orientation than you had, but then the geometry is the same as it was. Say, for example, we had a point starting at 0 and we went to 1 with that point. It would still, even if we rotated it 90 degrees, according to its relative position, would still be 0, 1. But in this case, it thinks its point goes from 0 to like 1, 1 on the other side, and it messes up the rotation completely. Then we also had these side fins. Every single one of the missiles we converted had this fin set on that one side break. Didn't have a break on any other side of that one. And then on top of this, we had the diagonals break. This one was really easy to fix. I literally just had to copy this piece and rotate it around slowly all the way back around, and then redo the UVs for it and everything. I did not fix the lower fins. I decided it was not worth the time. But yeah, so that broke all those. I suspect when we convert to tier 3, we'll have a similar problem, and then of course we'll have to come through and with the tier 3s as well, fix all the geometry up on them at a point in the future. Moving on, this is somewhat of a longer video than what I've made the last few days. Outside of this, I have finally got the first machine converted. Well, it's actually... Man, that hand flipping system is weird. Here we go. So I got the first machine converted. It's the EMP tower. It does actually work. It's set up. It's got rendered. You can open and close the GUIs. You can change the options. And it's doing pretty good. I still got to work on the animation. And I do have to come through and convert this to dot object. Now the reason why is because, well, the item renders as a block. And the only way to get the item to not render as a block is either take 2 approaches. You either do the JSON system, which is what I'm going to do, or you build your own custom model render and then you feed in this model into it. But I'm going to take the object approach because that will be much better in the long term, because then I can also switch over the block render to that same model, and it would be much smoother and much cleaner. At least that's the plan. Outside of that, not much else. More progress has been done. I mean, we got everything else working pretty well. I did toy with some of the explosives to clean this up. I did actually work on the translations for the radar gun, so the radar gun does actually translate properly, and it will send translations from the server to the client, and then the client will translate itself. So if there was bugs in the older version I didn't catch with this, where, say for example, the server was running English, but then you were running French locally, it should now translate to French. Well, if we had a French translation, we don't actually have that. A lot of our translations are outdated, and we'll have to eventually fix that. So that radar gun is tested, and I know it works. I haven't got a chance to test a lot of the other stuff. Eventually we'll get down through it and do a lot of stuff for that, but that'll be later, and hopefully I'll have a video out later to show all that stuff off, and I'll see you guys another time.